Have you ever sat at your desk at work, looked around at the gray walls and the fluorescent lights and thought, I cannot do this for the next 30 years? In the federal government, we're taught to worship the pension. We're told that if we just put in our time, follow the SOPs, and don't make waves, we'll be rewarded with a quiet retirement at 62 or 65 years old. But no one talks about the cost of those 30 years. No one talks about trading your best energy, your best health, and your best ideas to a system that actually doesn't need your creativity. It only needs your compliance. If you're new here, I'm Jovan. I spent 12 years in the federal government. I climbed the ranks from TSA to serving as a federal police officer at the Pentagon. I had the good money, I had the great benefits, and I had the kind of job security that most people would absolutely kill for. And I still walked away. I quit because my Airbnb business replaced my entire federal salary in just 15 months. I didn't leave because I was reckless. I left because I built a bridge that was stronger than the one that the government provided. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I did it, step by step, so you can see the blueprint for your own exit. Now, before we talk about the money I make now, we need to be honest about the money I made back then. When I was at the Pentagon, the financial picture looked perfect on paper. I had a stable salary, a healthcare plan that most people can only dream of, and I had a clear path for advancement. Now look, I want to be clear. I do respect the job. The federal government provided for me for over a decade. But as an architect, I had to audit the ceiling. In a government job, your value is capped by a pay scale. It doesn't matter if you work 10 times harder than the person next to you. You're moved up the ladder at a predetermined pace. Your time is not your own. Your annual leave is just a limited resource that you have to request permission to use. You're trading your most productive hours for someone else's priorities. I realized that my security was actually a form of stagnation. I was trading my life for a steady check that barely kept up with inflation, while my real value was being suppressed. I wasn't looking for a raise. I was looking for an uncapped potential. I wanted to build something where the only ceiling was my own ability to execute. So here's what the first few months looked like when I started building that bridge on the side. When I launched my first unit, I was entering a world of extreme friction. I was working at an off-site location for the Pentagon, and my schedule had just transitioned into what we call the Panama schedule. If you've never worked it, it's a 12-hour grind. My shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Now, at first glance, it does sound stable. You work 2 days, you're off 2 days, then you work 3 days, off 2, and it keeps rotating like that. But in reality, it means your life is lived in the inverted hours. While the rest of the world was waking up and checking into their Airbnbs, I was just finishing a 12-hour shift from standing post. At this point, I was making about $100,000 a year. I had my base pay of about $80,000, but because I was working those nights and weekends, the differentials pushed me into six figures. I was vested, which meant I was earning 6 hours of annual leave every pay period. But here's the math that no one tells you. Since my shifts were 12 hours long, it took me 4 weeks of perfect attendance just to earn 1 day off. I was burning my time twice as fast as I was earning it. And because we had a small crew at my location off-site, my freedom wasn't even guaranteed. If a colleague had requested leave before me, I was stuck on post no matter what was happening with my business. I realized very quickly that I was trapped in a system that valued my presence but not my time. In the Airbnb world, there are 2 hot zones every single day, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. 10 a.m. is checkout. That's when the question starts. Can I leave my bags? How do I lock the door? 4 p.m. is when it's check-in. That's when the anxiety is high. The code isn't working. Where do I park? Questions like this. Because I was working 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., these 2 windows hit me at my weakest points. At 10 a.m., I had only been off of work for about 4 hours. I was trying to get some sleep, but my phone tends to blow up with guest questions and inquiries. At 4 p.m., I was just waking up, trying to get my mind right for another 12-hour night shift, while also guiding a guest into my unit. I was living in a constant state of dual awareness. I was a federal officer responsible for security of a high-level site, and I was a hospitality host responsible for the experience of a paying guest. I had to learn to be an institutional communicator. I used Hospitable to automate the basic messages, but for everything else, I had to be precise. I couldn't afford to waste time on chatting. I had to provide solutions in seconds so I can get back to my primary mission, or get back to sleep. By the end of month 3, I sat down and performed a cold financial audit. My first unit, a property with a mortgage under $2,000, had brought in $5,000 in revenue in month 1 and $6,000 in month 2. After I paid the mortgage, the utilities, and the cleaning fees, I was left with $3,000 to $4,000 in net profit. I looked at that number and I looked at my pay stub from the Pentagon. To get that same $3,000 from the government after taxes, I had to sacrifice 80 hours of my life. I had to wear a uniform, stand on my feet for 12 hours at a time, and ask permission to take a lunch break. But for that $3,000 from Airbnb, the work I did was mostly architectural. It was setting up a system, choosing the furniture, and auditing the pricing software. The machine was doing the heavy lifting while I was at work or asleep. And that was the moment that the side hustle mindset died and the exit protocol began. I didn't see one unit anymore. I saw a math problem. If one unit gave me $3,000, then a second identical unit can give me a total of $6,000. 3 units of the same size meant I was making more than my federal salary. The excitement wasn't just about the money. It was also about the leverage. I realized that I had built a bridge that can actually hold the weight of my future. I just needed to start stacking the units. Between months 4 and 8, my life was in a study of dual existence. I was still a federal officer, but my mind was fully occupied with the architecture of scale. Because I worked at an offsite location for the Pentagon, I had a strategic advantage. The environment was controlled and extremely quiet. While the world saw an officer on a post, I was running a stealth operation. I even brought my laptop to work. I wasn't just surfing the web. I was looking at data. I was analyzing market shifts, responding to guest inquiries with institutional speed, and refining my pricing protocols. Now this is the phase where the business moved from a project to a machine. I realized that if I could manage 1 unit from a security desk, I could manage 4. The difficulty didn't come from the labor. It came from the transition in focus. You have to be able to switch from a high-stakes security mindset to a high-service hospitality mindset in a matter of seconds. I used those 12-hour shifts to build the back end of my entire empire. And I didn't need to spend thousands of dollars on marketing to get my next few units. I used the institutional proof of my first house. I wasn't just telling people that I had an Airbnb. I was showing them the success of the Airbnb. I showed friends and families my Airbnb photos. I showed them a calendar that was consistently booked with plenty of bookings. And when they asked how I handled difficult guests or maintenance, I didn't give them hustler fluff. I just gave them my own protocol. I had the answers because I was actually doing the work. In this business, trust is built through execution. When people see you handling the details with precision, they don't just see a regular host. They see an operator that they can trust. And that is how my referral started. My coworkers and friends became my biggest advocates because they saw the showroom quality that I was producing. I didn't need to cold call. I just needed to be the most competent person in the room. During these months, the math moved from hope to history. We were consistently hitting gross revenue between $5,000 and $6,000. I saw my first ceiling in March and April, where revenue exploded to $7,000 a month. Now, I want to be honest about why that happened. When you launch a new listing and you execute at a high level, the Airbnb algorithm gives you a new host boost. I harnessed that traction by ensuring that my response rates were 100% and my guest reviews were flawless. Even in the slow months of January and February, the floor for our units were about $4,000. For an amateur, a 50% drop in revenue from peak to off-peak would cause a panic. But for an architect, it's just a data point. I knew that the $4,000 floor still covered all of my operating costs and still left a margin. This is why you must understand your break-even math before you scale. If your floor doesn't support the weight of your business, your ceiling doesn't matter. Now, as I moved toward 4 units, I hit the limit of manual engagement. I couldn't be everywhere at once, which meant I had to remove the human variable from my operations. My very first standard operating procedure was the cleaner checklist. I realized that if I wanted Unit 4 to look exactly like Unit 1, I couldn't rely on a cleaner's intuition. I created a hyper-detailed checklist that dictated every single action. Where the towels are placed, the angle of the pillows, the specific cleaning agents for the surfaces. This SOP was the living tissue. Every time I noticed a minor error or a guest gave feedback, I didn't just fix the problem, I also fixed the protocol. I added to the checklist, and I also took away the confusing parts. I was building a system where a cleaner could just walk in and produce a showroom quality result without me ever having to say a word. This is the first step toward true freedom, building a machine that operates based on instructions, not supervision. The final piece of this phase for me was my coworker that turned advisor. One of my close friends from the job, someone who was incredibly business-minded, actually became an investor and an advisor for me. And I didn't just take his money, I also took his perspective. During those months, I showed him the back end. I showed him the spreadsheets, the hospitable dashboard, and the growth of projections. He was the one person I could vent to when a guest was difficult, but was also the one who challenged my thinking. Every high-level operator needs a mentor or advisor who can offer a new perspective when you're too close to the project. He helped me see that I wasn't just a guy with some Airbnbs. I was an entrepreneur building a bridge out of the Pentagon. By month 9, the game shifted. Up until this point, I had been riding a wave of social authority. Referrals were finding me, but to reach Unit 8, I had to move from a passive recipient to an active hunter. I had to start cold calling. If you want to know if you have what it takes to leave your 9 to 5, look at how you handle no. I spent hours on the phone while managing my federal duties, reaching out to landlords and to property managers who didn't want to hear it. To be honest, most people are stubborn. They've been conditioned to think that a long-term tenant is actually the safest bet. But as an architect of this business, I had to deconstruct that delusion. I developed a logic-based pitch that I still use today. The traditional tenant versus the professional operator. A traditional tenant will let a property rot. They really don't care about the baseboards, the air filters, or the deep tissue health of the home because they aren't losing money on it if it happens to decline. But as an Airbnb operator, my entire revenue stream depends on that property being in pristine showroom condition. I treat a landlord's home better than they treat it themselves because my showroom quality protocol is what drives the 5-star reviews. Even with all of the refusals, that institutional logic eventually broke through. I started seeing yeses. Now, I need to be completely honest with you about a major mistake that I made during this phase. This is the part that most gurus skip, but as a big picture advisor, I have to call out my own failures. Now, by the time I hit Unit 8, I was still the sole point of contact for every guest. I was basically a one-man communication hub while still working 12-hour shifts at the Pentagon. This was an operational error. The reality is, I should have hired my first virtual assistant when I reached Unit 3 to 5. By waiting for Unit 8, I was creating what I call operational debt. I was trying to be a hero, but in reality, I was really just being a bottleneck. Now I'm managing 8 different units, 8 sets of check-in times, and 8 different sets of property quirks while standing at a post for the Pentagon was a recipe for burnout. When you refuse to delegate early, the quality of your life and eventually the quality of your guest service begins to slip. My mental bandwidth was being consumed by the Wi-Fi is down messages, when it should have been focus on scaling to unit number 9. If you're serious about the exit protocol, you have to stop thinking like a worker and start thinking like a CEO. Hiring a virtual assistant isn't a luxury, it's the infrastructure required to keep your machine from breaking. I learned the hard way that you cannot scale a 19-unit empire if you are still the one answering messages at 2 a.m. By month 12, the money now coming in was significant. Most people would have quit long ago, but I didn't. Why? Because I understood the difference between revenue and stability. Even with the cash flowing, the business was still new in my eyes. I didn't have years of data. I had months. And in the federal government, we don't move until the intelligence is verified. I really needed to see how these units handled the transition into a whole new year. Because the business wasn't interfering with my day-to-day operations yet, I was still balancing the 12-hour shifts and the 8 units effectively. There was no logical reason to rush to exit at this point. I was in what I like to call fortification mode. I was stacking cash, refining the SOPs, and waiting for the moment when the scale of the business would finally outweigh the security of the job. I wasn't running from the Pentagon. I was waiting for the business to demand 100% of my time. And that demand finally came in January 2024 when I picked up my 9th and 10th units. That was the moment the bridge was finally finished, at least I thought. By early January 2024, I hit unit 10, but honestly, I didn't realize it at the time, but I hadn't finished the bridge. I was building it while I was walking on it, and right around month 15, the board started to creak. I was facing a major shift change at the Pentagon that was going to demand even more of my physical presence than ever before. At the same time, my 10 units were demanding a level of operational oversight that I couldn't provide from a security post. I was at a crossroads. I could stay in the security of the government and watch my business crumble under its own weight, or I can quit and use my newfound time to stabilize the machine. I didn't quit because I was done. I quit because I was needed. The ROI on my time in the federal government was flat. The ROI on my time fixing my business was infinite. In February 2024, I handed in my papers. So when you leave a federal career after 12 years, people really don't understand it. In that environment, security is the highest god. My coworkers assumed that I'd been recruited by another agency or a high-paying private firm. When I told them that I didn't have another job and that I was just gonna quit to run my own business, the shock was very visible. They just couldn't compute the idea of walking away from a pension and a steady check without another safety net waiting for me. But what they didn't see was the 10-unit machine that I've been building in the dark for 15 months. I wasn't jumping into the void. I was jumping onto a platform that I'd already stress tested. Walking out of the job on my last day of the federal government is a feeling that I will never forget. It was a weight lifted off my shoulders. The end of the 12-hour shifts, the denied leave, and the rigid protocols. But as I walked to my car, a new weight was added. It was the weight of total responsibility. When you quit, the pressure to survive is 100% on you. There's no more guaranteed check on the 1st or in the 15th of the month. If the business fails, I fail. If the quality slips, I feel it. That transition from being a cog in the machine to being the engine of your own machine is the most intense psychological shift you will ever experience. But it's also where the true growth happens. That first Monday as a full-time entrepreneur, I didn't sleep in. I finally had the time to pay off the operational debt that I talked about earlier. I spent my first week deep diving into training my virtual assistants and solidifying the communication systems that I had neglected while I was on post. More importantly, I finally had the bandwidth to look at new markets. If I had stayed at the Pentagon, I would still be a local operator in Washington, D.C. area. I would have never had the time to scout, audit, and launch in a market like Houston, Texas. The freedom I bought wasn't just the freedom to relax. It was the freedom to expand. I realized that the security of my government job was actually a cage that was keeping me from reaching the next level. Once the cage was gone, the business truly began to fly. 15 months. That's all it took to dismantle a 12-year trajectory and replace it with a 10-unit empire. And I'm not special. I'm just someone who looked at the 30-year pension plan and realized I couldn't trade my best years for a gold watch and a maybe at age 60. If you're sitting at a desk right now, watching this on your lunch break, and you feel like there's something more for you, there is. But it doesn't happen through wishing. It happens through the Monday morning audit. You have the cheat codes. Now, you just need the discipline to execute them. Here is exactly what you're doing this Monday to start your own exit protocol. First, research your market. Do not guess based on vibes. Spend your morning on AirDNA and Google. I want you to find the specific short-term rental laws for your city and your county. Identify the regulatory floor before you even think about the revenue ceiling. 2. Set your first unit budget. Decide today exactly how much capital you're willing to invest. This isn't just for the lease. It's for the showroom quality furniture and the safety net for those first 2 months. Know your number down to the penny. 3. Start the hunt. You're calling landlords. You're pitching the professional operator versus the traditional tenant logic. Expect 50 no's for every yes. If you can't handle the rejection of a cold call, you aren't ready for the responsibility of an entire business. Set a hard timeline. Do not say eventually. Pick a date on the calendar. Whether it's 6 months or 15, that is your deadline to have Unit 1 live. A goal without a timeline is just a hallucination. Look, the bridge that I built wasn't perfect. It was creaking and swaying by the time I finally walked out from my federal job. I spent my first months of freedom fixing the cracks and paying off the operational debt of scaling too fast without a team. But I'd do it all again, because today, I don't answer to a supervisor, I don't request leave, and I don't have a ceiling on what I can earn. I am an architect of my own time. If you're ready to stop being a cog and start being an engine, my masterclass takes you from 0 to your first unit. Every single step with the institutional logic that I used to replace my own salary. The link is in the description. And the very first thing you should do after this video ends, go watch my beginner's guide to Airbnb arbitrage. I'll show you exactly how to get that first unit without owning a single piece of property. The clock is ticking on your 30 years. Start building your bridge today. I'll see you in the next one.